In Soviet Russia, Kulesh eats you. Today we're going to be taking a look at the single most important ration to the Soviet Red Army during the Second World War. In reality, it was about the only thing there was to eat for the Red Army, Kulesh, which is a basic grain porridge and a staple meal of both Russian and Ukrainian babushkas. The beautiful thing about Kulesh is you make it with what you have on hand. I'm following a more specific recipe. You don't have to. Red Army field kitchens turned this stuff out in mass quantities as it was basically the only thing there was to eat for Red Army soldiers. So Kulesh is a very simple grain porridge. There's not a tremendous amount of ingredients in it. In fact, it can be made with just grain and water. We're gonna follow a little different recipe. This is pretty authentic, although I am realistic that the average Red Army soldier would not have eaten this well 90% of the time. So we're going to start with some fat, and that fat's going to come from bacon. It doesn't have to be bacon. You can use any scrap meat whatsoever that you would like. As long as it will render some fat, it will do you some good and it will improve the flavor. All right, we're going to let that bacon sizzle. We're going to let it render fat. We're going to add an onion and 2 small potatoes, diced up. That's a fantastic smell right there. I'm using a cast iron cook pot here, a Dutch oven actually. Real small one, easy to carry, easy to maintain. Just feel like I'm getting an element of realism out of using cast iron here. They're incredibly useful for cooking out in the field or camping. You should check them out. Link to this one is below in the description. To the bacon, onion, and potato, we're gonna add 2 carrots diced up. Ooh, yeah, look at that. You know that's good just by smelling it. To this mix, we're gonna add a cup of what I have here are buckwheat groats. Again, you could use millet, you could use wheat groats, you could use any grain that you've got. 1 cup of buckwheat groats going in. We're also gonna add a cup of rinsed split peas. I'm gonna add just enough water to the pot to cover everything, no specific measurement. Just make sure everything's covered in water. And mixed in so that it's all combined. Want everything just covered. We don't want to make soup. That's it, right there. Over the course of cooking, water will boil off, so we're going to want to keep an eye on that, keep the water level topped off. For now, we're going to season the whole thing with salt and pepper. Just salt and pepper. Red Army soldiers would be very lucky to get any salt and pepper in there. Anything to give it a little bit more flavor is obviously a good thing. I like my food to have taste. We're good to let this cook now. We're going to let it cook for an hour. A lot of the info for this video was taken from the book, The Red Road from Stalingrad by Mansour Abdulin. Mansour was a Soviet infantryman in the 293rd Rifle Division. He was actually a mortarman. He arrived on the outskirts of Stalingrad just in time for Operation Ring. What makes Mansour so unique and incredible to read about is that in a time and place where the average Soviet infantryman's life expectancy was 2 weeks, he was on the front lines for a full year. What they could expect in a given day was a single loaf of black bread made from rye flour and a single bowl of Kulesh. Any mention of meat made by Mansour at all is sausages or salamis taken from dead Germans. In other words, they just were not fed meat. I've read a lot of memoirs on World War II. The undeniable takeaway that you come out of reading that memoir with is hardship. The Red Army suffered like you can't imagine, and that's before they even got to the front lines. So they arrive on the front lines, they move into their fighting positions in the trenches, and they basically have that first night, nothing happens. They get the signal at daybreak the next day to go on the attack. And half of the battalion is immediately killed. Half of them were killed on the very first day. I can almost imagine the kind of cold pragmatism that would have taken place, you know, in offices in the Kremlin with Joseph Stalin poring over reports and saying to himself, why would we feed the men more? They're not going to live long enough to starve to death. There's no direct evidence that Stalin or Stavka or anybody else in Soviet high command intentionally withheld food from the Red Army. And it is absolutely the truth that the Soviet Union was already experiencing a major food crisis at the outbreak of World War II. That tends to be what happens when you kill the most productive farmers in your society. But it certainly sounds like the kind of thing that Stalin would do. Mansour himself went through an interesting evolution throughout the course of the memoir. Both at the beginning and at the end, he is a hardcore, quote-unquote, good communist. As you might be able to infer from his name, he is Muslim. And he grew up under his father's tutelage, believing, like any good communist would, that there is no God other than the state. Over time, on the front line, he's so grateful just to receive his single bowl of Kulesh a day. He goes from saying there is no God to Allah be praised at the sight of a single bowl of Kulesh. Just further proves my theory that there are no atheists in foxholes. All right, it's been about a half an hour. Let's get a look-see in there. We may need to add some more water. Oh yeah, we need to add a little more water. Give everything a stir. Want to make sure it stays covered. Yeah, definitely still needs to cook more. Unfortunately, I don't have any fancy bread to go with this today. No rye bread like the Red Army soldiers would have gotten, and no homemade fancy bread. Just a couple of slices of regular old Martin's butter bread to go with this lovely repast. All right, so it's been over an hour. I think it's about ready to go. Let's get into this Kulesh and see how it came out. So it has really thickened up. Let's get a bowl of this going. It's really thick. Really soft too. Taking the whole pot off the fire because I want to stoke the fire back up. It's bloody cold out here. Smells good. Plain, but good. Tastes a little bit like pea soup. I can definitely taste the peas. The grains are almost more like texture, like very little taste, but more texture. I do taste carrots. I can taste the potato for sure. The taste that I thought would be overwhelming in this would be the onions, but I barely tasted it at all. It's nice and hot. Thick, hearty, warming, really tasty. This would be so much better if made with chicken broth or vegetable broth instead of water, that I could tell you. While this meal would become terribly tiresome after just a couple of days, I can absolutely understand why a soldier in Russian winter, it could die at any moment or be grievously wounded at any moment, would say Allah be praised when he gets his hot bowl of this stuff every evening. Like any good soldier, we gotta try making a sandwich out of it. See how it is on bread. Yep. It's not soup. It's not even stew. Too thick. You can't dunk it. But it's good with the bread. Definitely adding to the flavor. I know I'm going to take a beating in the comments section for this video because every Russian-speaking person in the world will have their own recipe for this, right? This is a very, very commonly made item. Everybody's babushka would have made this. Everybody's babushka would have had a little bit different recipe. Everybody's babushka's recipe would be the correct way to make it. The thing about Kulesh is you make it with what you have on hand. There isn't a right or a wrong way. Look, this is pretty far from fine dining. This is survival food here, especially when one considers that this is all there was and it was only one bowl a day. But I could absolutely see why every soldier in the Red Army would have been extremely, extremely grateful to get his bowl of this at the end of a hard day's fighting. On its face, you know, by itself, in isolation, it's not a bad meal. It's actually got some interesting textures and taste to it. Something that you would definitely enjoy if you were fed once in a while. On top of that, it's thick, it's filling, it's hearty, it's warming. It's all the things you want from good hot chow in the field. Not only would you get totally exhausted with it very, very quickly, but you would be undernourished very, very quickly. So this just links back to what I said before. The word to take away from the Red Army infantryman's experience in World War II is hardship. So if you enjoyed this video and you'd like to see another like it, check out my playlist, Military Rations Through History, by clicking this playlist over here. Make sure you're subscribed, and if you like what you've seen here today, please consider becoming a member. Membership really helps support the channel, and you'll get a vote on what videos get made next. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time. Peace!